All right, so most of us, we've heard about the assassination attempt on Pope John Paul II, right? But what if the official story, the one we all kind of remember, wasn't the real conspiracy? In this explainer, we're going to dig into an analysis that basically flips the entire narrative on its head. It asks us to question not just, who pulled the trigger, but who wrote the story in the first place.
Okay, so let's set the scene. It's St. Peter's Square, May 13th, 1981. You've got this massive, packed crowd, a really beloved pope, and then, out of nowhere, gunshots. Pope John Paul II goes down, he's seriously wounded, and the entire world is just watching in absolute horror. I mean, this was an event that shook the globe to its very core.
And as soon as that initial chaos died down, there was really only one question on everybody's mind. The whole world just had to know who would do this and why. The search for answers kicked off immediately.
And you know what? A story started to take shape really fast, and it was a story that just so happened to fit perfectly with the whole Cold War vibe of the time. The media started reporting that the person responsible wasn't just some lone gunman. Nope. It was the Soviet Union's KGB working through their buddies, the Bulgarians.
So this story, this Bulgarian connection, pretty much became the accepted truth for millions of people. But the analysis we're looking at today? Well, it suggests something way more unsettling. What if the actual plot wasn't the shooting itself, but the story that got built up around it? That's the big, provocative question we're tackling here. So, let's start by digging into that official story.
Okay, first up, let's break down the official narrative that really grabbed hold of everyone. It was pushed by a few key people, and it got this name, the Sterling Hansa Kolb model, or SHK for short. And, on the surface, it sounded pretty convincing.
So this SHK model, it really stood on three main ideas. First, the motive, right? The KGB wanted to shut down Poland's solidarity movement. And how do you do that? You take out its biggest supporter, the Polish Pope. Second, the proof. After a year and a half in prison, the gunman, this guy Mehmet Ali Agca, he finally confesses and points the finger at 3 Bulgarians. And third, the assumption that the KGB are total pros. Of course they'd hire a Turkish right-winger as a cover, for plausible deniability. It all just seemed to fit together so neatly.
But here's where it gets interesting. According to the analysis we're looking at, when you start to actually scrutinize this perfect story, it really starts to fall apart. So let's go ahead and look at some of the cracks in the case. Let's just start with the most basic thing, the motive. I mean, did it really make sense for the Soviets to order this hit in the first place?
Well, the counter-argument here is that killing the Polish Pope would have been, and this is a quote, an act of extreme foolishness. Seriously, think about it. Instead of crushing the Polish spirit, it would have just made them furious and united them against the Soviets. The payoff seems tiny compared to the massive risk of being found out.
Then you've got the next big problem, the gunman, Mehmet Ali Agca. See, the official story tried to paint him as just some apolitical mercenary for hire. But the evidence? It tells a totally different story. This guy was a committed, lifelong Turkish right-wing nationalist, a fascist, who had actually threatened to kill the Pope way back in 1979. That's long before solidarity in Poland was even a huge deal. The point is, he had his own reasons.
And this brings us to a huge contradiction, right? The whole official story depends on the idea that the KGB are these master spies, the best of the best. But if that's true, then why was this whole plot so unbelievably clumsy?
I mean, just think about it. This analysis points out that a pro-agency would never hire a known, mentally unstable criminal like Agca. Why would they blow his cover by bringing him to Sofia for training? And they would absolutely not meet him out in the open in Rome. And maybe the biggest thing of all, why didn't they silence him after the attack? Every single one of these supposed steps completely trashes the whole idea of plausible deniability. It doesn't add up. So, okay, if the official story is just full of holes, what's the alternative? Well, this is where the analysis introduces a really fascinating idea, that the story of the Bulgarian connection wasn't discovered, it was supplied.
Just take a look at the timeline. For 17 months, that's almost a year and a half, Agca is in prison and says absolutely nothing about a big conspiracy. Then, boom, September 1982, the Bulgarian Connection theory gets published in Reader's Digest and blasted on NBC. And what happens just 2 months later? Agca, who we know had access to news in prison, suddenly has this big confession and names his Bulgarian accomplices. The timing is, well, it's incredibly suspicious to say the least.
So, the big question is, was he coached? This analysis points to a whole bunch of things. First, his prison was apparently notoriously porous, meaning people and information could get in and out. He was also known for his unquenchable thirst for the spotlight. He was literally offered a shorter sentence if he cooperated. And on top of all that, there were reports that his safety was threatened and that he was getting visits from Italian intelligence. The argument is that any truly objective reporter would look at all this and see a massive red flag for a potential setup.
Okay, so this brings up an even bigger question. Why on earth did the media jump on this story so eagerly when there were so many red flags? Well, according to this source, it's a textbook example of a certain kind of system at work.
The source has a name for this: free market disinformation. And it's not what you might think, like some top-down government conspiracy. It's more of a system where claims that are really useful to powerful people, in this case painting the Soviets as pure evil during the Cold War, get started and pushed by the media until they just become the news, whether they're actually credible or not.
So who was pushing this particular narrative? The analysis points to three main players. You've got Claire Sterling, who wrote that big Reader's Digest article. You've got Paul Henze, who is a longtime CIA propaganda guy and, get this, was also funded by Reader's Digest. And then there's Michael Ledeen, an activist connected to the Reagan administration. The source basically argues that, their backgrounds alone suggest they had a pretty strong reason to want this story to be true.
So, after all this, after this story dominated headlines for years, what actually happened when the whole thing finally went to court? The result wasn't just a verdict on the case. This analysis argues it was really a verdict on journalism itself.
After that long trial in Rome, after all the years of nonstop media coverage and all the accusations, the final number of Bulgarians convicted of plotting to kill the Pope was this.
0. A big fat 0. The prosecution's entire case just fell apart. There was no credible evidence to back up all those years of speculation. This huge conspiracy that had been on every front page around the world, it couldn't even hold up in a court of law. But what happened after the verdict is maybe just as telling. Did the media take a step back and do some serious soul-searching? Did anyone ask, hey, how did we get this so incredibly wrong? According to this analysis, not really. They kind of tried to explain away the verdict, and then the story just vanished. It was dropped. No looking back, no accountability.
And all of that leaves us with one last really powerful question. This whole case of the Bulgarian Connection kind of forces us to ask something pretty fundamental about the news we consume. If a story is useful enough to people in power, does it even matter if it's true? Definitely something to think about.